SIWJGTTATB Media. Welcome to One Sweet Dream, a podcast where we explore the dream that was and is the Beatles. Hello and welcome to One Sweet Dream. I am your host, Diana Erickson, and today we are doing a new episode of Hidden Gems and Unsung Masterpieces. And my guests are the whole team of Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About the Beatles podcast. So welcome, everyone.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank
you.
Hi.
Well, thank you for being here. Do you mind introducing yourselves for everybody listening?
I'm
Please.
Will Hines. I'm one of the people from the Screw It. We're just going to talk about the Beatles podcast.
I'm Joel Spence. Same.
I'm Katie Plattner. I'm also on that podcast.
I'm Brett Morris.
We're grateful to be thought of as people who are worthy of being invited on podcasts.
Absolutely you are.
Yeah.
You know, actually, you're super fun for me to have on my podcast because we were just talking about when you started your podcast. It must have coincided with a renewed interest in the Beatles or something, because it was when I was re-engaging with them at that time.
It was it was just after the 2016 election, and my friends were talking about politics so much, and I was weary of it. And so the title, Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About the Beatles, although this is never spelled out and it doesn't matter if people know it, was me saying, all right, look, I'm not going to talk about anything serious. We're just going to talk about the Beatles and just feel good. So that's what spurred me starting this podcast.
Yeah.
But I feel like it goes in cycles, you know, like the Beatles.
Oh, it does.
I mean, they're always huge, but even relative to their ubiquitous presence in our culture, they do kind of renew every now and then, I feel like, and a whole new group gets into them and they sort of become newly cool. Like there'll be a while where I just don't hear them, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing Beatles t-shirts like on the streets being worn by like 16-year-olds, and I'm like, well, I guess they're in the zeitgeist somehow.
I sometimes wonder if we're just at the mercy of what Apple Core Beatles releases that determines when they're in the news, and
like
when
a
they're
Giles
not.
Martin remix comes out and that gets a bunch of coverage or something.
Now they're in the zeitgeist again. Yeah.
Or Paul talks about them all jerking off. And then,
maybe Paul appears on SNL or something, and that does that's enough to like push things up or whatever.
Yeah, we talked before about, for I guess my age group or a little younger, that like, you know, the anthology coming out in the 90s kind of like reintroduced a group to it, or I'm of the age that my parents taught me about the Beatles, and so some of it, I don't know, I feel like, at least for me personally, I do go through kind of waves of being more into it. Like I never feel like I'm not into the Beatles, but I feel like I go through cycles where for a week that's just all I listen to, even though I've heard it all 1,000 times. And
listeners should know that all of us were introduced to the Beatles by our parents. Not none of us lived through it.
No, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to imply that I'm 40 years younger than everybody.
But I think you're right, Katie. Like the anthology was definitely like a milestone. Like there are a lot of people whose gateway into the Beatles was the anthology or watching it with their parents or something like that. Like I think there's a whole generation of fans that are basically like Beatles anthology babies. Like, so
Yes, for sure. And I think you're right that I bet you there'll be a new wave from Get Back.
no,
There's
I
just
bet.
like some big thing that triggers a new group of people to fall in love with the Beatles. But I think that what you said, Will, is really interesting because actually it was the same for me that I was listening to so many political podcasts,
Yeah.
that I just couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And the Beatles always seem to come into the zeitgeist when we need a little healing too. So maybe that's it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it. Like I would laugh. I loved hearing about the Beatles. I would laugh at you guys. I found that I just loved you talking about them. Like
Oh,
when you
that's
guys got
great.
away from the facts, because
Yeah.
but
we have gotten better for truly. Like, I mean, we've always been fast and loose with being accurate, not on purpose, just out of laziness and lack of preparedness, not a lack of love. But doing the podcast taught at least me like a lot more than I used to know. I mean, thank God we brought Brett and Joel on. I do feel like Katie and I are more likely to not know some trivia information.
Oh, I'm the least likely of all of us by far. There's
not that Brett and Joel are infallible, but they definitely increased our integrity in terms of just actually knowing things.
Yeah, well, there's that, but then there is also I like it when you guys would just wing it and talk about your opinions too.
Yeah.
And that was what made it really fresh. Sometimes when you get in the Beatles world, it brings all that baggage. Like if you listen, I'm not referring to any other podcast, but just like even books, sometimes they come with all of these tropes and truisms about and baggage of the Beatles.
Well, I love your podcast for just counteracting, giving a new narrative of existing facts, being like, well, we actually don't connect the dots in the way that people tend to connect them. And I like having a new way to tell the story. But if there's any contribution our podcast has given, and that is unlikely, but if there is any, it's that I wanted to capture the fun of like being at a party and you run into someone who likes the Beatles and you just both can't stop talking about it. And you're like, oh, did you ever listen to this? And whatever's going on in Beatledom at the time. Have you watched Get Back, or did you listen to the new White Album, or just do you like the White Album? It doesn't even have to be any kind of revolutionary take, but the kind of excitement of finding someone else who likes it. That's what I was more interested in that than winning. I did a quiz last week on Sporkle where you have to type every Beatles track if you can just type all of the songs. I don't know why. I was doing that. I was like, I'm going to nail this. And I missed 4, and one of them was Mr. Moonlight. I was looking at Beatles for Sale. I was like, what track am I missing here? What is this? And my mind had erased Mr. Moonlight from my memory.
Yeah. I bring it up every podcast.
Because I love myself, and I have allowed myself to forget that song. That's why.
That's fine.
And also just letting people like it with or without knowledge. I mean, I love a good Beatles trivia talk. I love hearing deep cut stories. I love that too. But I don't want someone to feel like they have to earn the right to be excited about the band. Like if you love the song Yesterday and you think it's beautiful, you're a Beatles fan. Like you don't need to be able to have a bibliography of facts. Although I'm not against that either. If you are the kind of Beatles nerd who like has cross-referenced a bunch of biographies, and that's interesting to me too. So I'm into enthusiasm, whatever package it arrives in.
Well, yeah, I think your podcast delivered on that. It did. It made it fun. Sometimes with the Beatles, it can be not fun. There's so much competition. Everybody's got their their Beatle. And I mean, on my podcast, I do challenge the dominant narrative.
No, I love it. You guys have so many primary sources that you cite. I love it. It's super exciting.
Yeah. When I started to dig into the Beatles again, there just happened to be a lot more resources.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden there were some big collectors that were sharing stuff online, and just, all these little interviews and YouTube and print articles that people were sharing that I think even authors hadn't had access to. And once we had all of this, it was like you could start to tell a different story.
My pitch for an episode for you, Diana, is to do one where you give a like curriculum of things that people should read, like, the Maureen Cleave interviews,
Yep.
or whatever it is you would,
Oh, yeah.
if you think the Hunter Davies biography,
Oh, definitely.
okay, so whatever your picks would be, I think that'd be really interesting, because I'm actually sort of inconsistent in what I've read. Like, I've kind of just read whatever books have come out while I
Yeah.
was in one of my Beatles flow times,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
And you've watched the Beatles cartoons.
The Beatles cartoon is my main source of Beatles information. Absolutely, yeah. That's mostly what I'm getting my info from.
Yeah, I learned everything from a couple of lunchboxes. So
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that would be great. The problem is I don't like most books, but I think that you could actually
That's
put them.
exactly right. I want whatever few things have passed muster for you. I want that
Yeah,
list. I
yeah.
think that would be cool.
Okay, well, the Cleve interviews for sure,
Okay.
because that's what I'm doing right now. I am literally having them read to you, so you don't even need to read them. I've got 2 more coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Great.
And Duncan Driver just reads it at the end. So,
I love
but
it.
yeah, those are amazing. And Hunter Davies must be read, because the thing about Hunter that's interesting is the Beatles gave those interviews before the breakup.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
They weren't
and
trying to
so-
spin. They weren't trying to spin that yet. That wasn't even on their brains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For that reason, it's incredible. Yeah. Okay. I've had a few requests for that, so I
Yeah.
will do that in the future. So thank
All right,
you.
my work here's done. So I'll see you guys later. I got my.
Right.
Actually, while we're on the subject of spin and debunking narratives, any thoughts on Get Back?
Did it change any of your points of view on that period?
No, I think it just provided evidence that we sort of knew was there. There's so much about the differences between them. This is me personally. Others might have a different opinion. That, like, if, for example, in the anthology CDs, anytime there was banter between, or you heard them just chatting with each other, or talking in the studio, that was sometimes more music to my ears than the take number 5 of No Reply. That the reason why we keep going back to them as a source, the reason why we keep talking about them, is how much love they put into this world.
Yeah.
With and a little ambition too. I wouldn't shake a stick of, I don't know what the term is, fuck it. That's important too, that their ambition, their love for each other, even though they probably didn't spend a lot of time, as men don't do, like communicating this love.
Yeah.
But they had a great time together, and there was a reason why they were a success. And so seeing evidence of that beyond just the songs, and seeing particularly the Get Back sessions, which have only been depicted as a hurricane, to see that even a wonderful storm of them just getting along and doing the thing that they do, that we love so much, is just it's a better. I'm glad it's out there for the world to see. I guess that's how I would.
yeah,
I love that.
For me, I mean, I loved watching it, and I agree with you, Joel. I think a lot of what appealed to me about the Beatles, even when I was a kid, was that you can hear that they're having fun together, or they're being silly. So on Anthology, but even in like Hey Bulldog or whatever, they're doing funny voices, and I think you can hear how much they all did want to be there. And then I remember, because we, for the podcast, watched the original edit of Let It Be, the movie, and I remember being like, I guess they're disagreeing, but it nobody was screaming at each other. It felt very overhyped, the drama of it. And then I did feel like it was so fun in Get Back, just being like, well, yeah, they're annoyed, like they're in this stupid space, no one's leaving them alone. Like, I did feel like, more just comparing it to the original cut of the movie, I was like, oh, of course they were frustrated at the situation. Like, it just seemed very normal, and like they were my cool friends that I was hanging out with.
Okay, so we have a giant list, and I must say that your lists of songs, like the way that you took the brief and dealt with the brief, was very funny to me, actually, because, the Hidden Gems thing was my idea. I basically wanted people to come on and champion any song that they loved. There's so many great songs, especially solo Beatles songs.
that people don't talk about. And I was going to call this songs we should be talking about more, but then I thought I'll just call it Hidden Gems and Unsung Masterpieces, because there really are. There's gems and then there's little masterpieces. So you guys were quite funny in how some of you took it very seriously and chose the most unsung possible songs that you can imagine. And then we also have probably one of the world's biggest hits on this list. So
You're welcome. You're welcome.
We have
first,
the full range.
Will at first picked the 2-second gap of silence, in between certain tracks, which I thought was really overboard.
Between There's a Place and Twist and Shout. The gap in between those two songs was my first unsung.
What
song.
a breath! What a breath!
And you claimed the mono was even better.
Mono mix of that silence finally got it right.
Yeah. Of course, I basically panicked when I heard that, or I got way in my head over what possibly counts as a hidden gem.
See, you took it really seriously. Yeah.
And there's so much solo stuff that I'm always basically talking about to myself in my head. So it's like I could pick like 100 songs and I've totally lost track of what's actually famous out there.
I do not have a good sense of what is like as close to general consensus as there ever is among Beatles fans of like what songs are.
Yeah.
And so I was texting the group and being like, do people like this song? I mean, I know like yesterday, Hey Jude, there's some that are unquestionably big and beloved, but
I would love that. I would love that if somebody came on and said, you know what? Yesterday's so ubiquitous. Let me tell you why it's great, because nobody talks about why it's great. So this is what I mean, how it could be anything. If somebody wanted to come on and say, you think Strawberry Fields Forever is great, let me tell you, it doesn't get enough credit. So it could be that, or, Brett, you have the most random, like you really took it seriously.
Even Paul McCartney has another one here.
I didn't even...
And Joel, I actually thought Joel was kidding with his selections. I was like, okay, yeah, those will be special. Now
They've already been cut for time.
Well, now I'm curious, actually. So if you notice, I put one back on the list.
Oh, great.
Okay. So anyways, we have a really, really great range here. And we're going to start with a Will selection, which is My Brave Face.
I've been living in style, unaccustomed as I am to the luxury life. I've been hitting the town and it didn't hit back. I've been doing the rounds, unaccustomed as I am to this time on my hands. Now I don't have to tell anybody, but I'm gonna get back. Ever since you went away, I've had this sentimental inclination not to change a single thing. As I pull the sheets back from the bed, I wanna go bury my head in your pillow. Now that I'm alone again, I can't stop breaking down again. The simplest thing set me off again and take me to that place where I can find my brave face, where I can find my brave face, where I can find my brave face. I've been living a life, unaccustomed as I am to the work of a housewife. I've been breaking up dirty dishes and been throwing them away.
Specifically the demo version.
Yes. I think the demo version of this song is superior to the studio version that got released, although I do like that version also. But
yeah.
So this song ends up on Flowers in the Dirt. It's one of the compositions that Paul wrote with Elvis Costello, and they wrote almost an album's worth of songs together, and I pretty much love all of them.
Yeah.
This was the single off of Flowers in the Dirt, right? I think it was the first single.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And This was 1989, and so this was the first new Beatles release that happened when I was fully in love with the Beatles, right? Like everything came out on CD in 1987. I got all that, obsessed over it deeply, and then 2 years later, this album comes out.
Yeah.
And so I was, really excited, and I saw Paul on this tour. Joel, I know you did too.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And it was great, and he did a ton of Beatles songs on that. So I love just My Brave Face and I also was a huge Elvis Costello fan. So it was like this insane marriage of two people that I really liked. I think Costello really worked well with Paul and challenged him in a good way. But My Brave Face, the studio version, is very, very, very 1989. It's very like computer sounding. I'm not even enough of a production person to tell you how, but it sounds dated and maybe ungood. And then a friend of mine who's a big Elvis Costello fan gave me an MP3 of the demo version in like the early 2000s when it was just Paul and Elvis singing it together with acoustic guitars, and it was so lovely, and their harmonies were so sublime.
Yeah.
It leapt out like I had never heard it before. And I know a lot of times the demo of a song gets something that the studio version didn't, but I think the difference in this case is so huge. Like you listen to the song, you're like, oh yeah, this is a brilliant tune.
Yeah.
And that's lost in the studio version. And an interview that Elvis Costello did in Q magazine once, he talked about in doing demos with Paul that he was intimidated to harmonize because Paul's voice would come booming in. And I think the quote Costello had was, "The whole world's in his voice. Like you've heard it since you were a baby." And it's like this super familiar, friendly voice that you've known forever. And then he has to sing along with it. And he had to like muster all his courage. And in this demo, the Paul high harmonies, I think he even misses a couple notes. He's like finding it or whatever. But when he locks in, it's so beautiful that I can just feel Elvis being like, oh my gosh, I'm singing with Paul McCartney. And I just love the tune. And it's Paul's tune, and Elvis wrote the middle bit when it gets very wordy and stuff. The differences are very distinct between the Paul and the Elvis sections, but I love that too. I love that the two personalities are there.
Do you know who wrote the majority of the lyrics, or do you
it was a Paul song that Elvis helped finish, so it's more Paul than Elvis, from what I understand.
That's really interesting.
So I think Elvis just wrote the "Ever since you went away, I've had a sentimental whatever, not to change a single thing." And that Paul's are more like square on the cadence. Mm-hmm. Now that I'm alone again. That's the Paul part. But it comes ringing forward like an anthem in that Paul part. I mean, I just think it's a tremendous, tremendous song that because of cheesy production choices doesn't get its due. And I think the demo would be a favorite of any Beatles fan, any Elvis Costello fan. It's just lovely.
I think the lyrics are really, you don't hear the lyrics when you hear the single version.
Exactly.
You hear the lyrics a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and it becomes this mature, it's almost a brave or a new territory for Paul to write about this kind of subject. And that's what made me think it was a Costello more, but I love that it's more Paul.
It's about a breakup and putting on your brave face, even though your heart's broken, very Tears of a Clown territory. Yeah. You don't hear Paul. We've talked about that. He doesn't often take the vulnerable position in his storytelling. Yes, he does it many times, but not usually. We can work it out. Everything's going to be great. Take a sad song and make it better. But here's one where he's like, now that I'm alone again, and it's sad. I adore it. I adore it.
Well, it's also so Paul. I think that Paul really has a brave face. He doesn't always go to the super vulnerable place or really let us in. He lets us in little bits and pieces, And so I think that it's very vulnerable that he admits that he's got this brave face, I thought it's Paul admitting what he does.
Yes, exactly. And the particular harmony on "Take Me to That Place" right before they go into the chorus, "Take me to that place," is right out of "If I Fell." Like the harmony there is right out of "If I Fell" in a way that I bet you they were embarrassed about it. It's almost like you can't do this harmony with Paul.
So struck, like when I first listened to "Flowers in the Dirt," like I just bought that off the shelf. I think maybe like in the late 90s, just thinking, oh, this is a Paul McCartney album I've never heard one note of.
Yeah.
And I had never read any write-up about it or anything. So my first honest opinion of it was that I just did
Unremarkable.
not like the
Yeah.
album at
Yeah.
all. It just sounded so cheesy and
Yeah.
dated and not like the Paul I wanted to hear and blah, blah, blah. And so it's just amazing to me to hear the demos, which I think were only actually publicly available only like 2 years ago or
Yeah.
something.
With
They
the
did a
revision.
deluxe version, yeah.
And every song, it's like it shows he really is still writing with the sort of Beatles method, you know? It's like him and Elvis harmonizing sort of just like how Paul and John would harmonize, the chord changes, the sort of structure. It's all there, and it just shows that it was all in the production. You know, I think a lot of people in the 80s, especially of that generation, were really in their heads about getting
Yeah.
away from their 60s and 70s roots and
Yeah.
forcing themselves to be up to date and modern. And it the demos are so cohesive, and the harmonies are beautiful. If they just stuck to that, I think
Yeah.
And
we
Diana,
would all remember it.
sorry, Katie, go ahead.
Oh, well, we talked about kind of a similar thing on an old episode of ours a while ago where we talked about George Harrison's album Gone Troppo.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of it where we were like, I can't even tell if I like this song
Yeah.
because the production is just, there really is a chunk of maybe 4 or 5 years there where, and I don't know, where it is weird how immediately dated it sounds in a way where, you know, on Egypt Station, when Paul McCartney was like, I'm going to work with the people that work with Taylor Swift and Adele and produce all that, and it's like, how's that going to sound in 10 years? Because that was chasing the hit sound of the day in a maybe similar way.
And Diana, what you said about the lyrics, about that's really poignant about what, like, Paul talking about what we really know about Paul, calling himself out a little bit, which is really what John Lennon does constantly with his songs. He's always so easy to call himself out as his own personality and his failings, but Paul was not so much like that, like with that same brave face.
Yeah.
So that's what made me think of that.
Well, you know, and John actually did complain that Paul would put on a mask.
Yeah.
That they'd be arguing and that this mask would come down. You know, Paul talks about how when he was, you know, when his mother died, he basically learned to have a mask. John fronts a lot, whereas I think Paul has a mask and he doesn't let his emotions through always outside of music.
To me, it's always read as specific to Paul, but also kind of a generally British stiff upper lip kind of approach.
Yes.
But I think what's nice, or what makes it feel vulnerable, isn't just the self-awareness of, you know, him acknowledging having to wear the brave face or whatever, but also just recognizing that it's effortful.
Yes. Yes. I think Paul must have struggled in the 80s. My goodness, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, you listen to Press to Play? Jesus. Sorry. That's because I have to listen to the album because I use it as a punching bag so often that I think I've seen the video once when it came out and I never saw it again.
I want to see you listen. I bet you burst into tears. Like, it'll really hit you like so hard when you finally listen to it. And you deserve it. You deserve it. It'll rock you.
Yeah.
You can come on and we'll do a live version. Your first take.
Great.
Okay.
I come over to your house. You're crying to like Spies Like Us or something like that.
That's one thing I've noticed. I feel like I've noticed about Paul, maybe even in the last 10 years. Like, I feel like he's a lot more forthcoming or like generous in his interviews and sort of he like I always found him, or if you look at old interviews basically from the Beatles to the 90s, he can kind of give you that cold shoulder a little bit. I feel like it was tough to crack him a little bit, and I feel like in his age he's gotten a lot more like open to the nostalgia factor of the Beatles. He's less resistant to talking about it.
He probably
he'll open up about John, and he'll open up about it more, and it's nice to see.
Yeah, I think he probably has the distance from it to where, you know, the Beatles breakup isn't so present, or like his legacy is its own thing at this point. So yeah, to allow himself to be more sentimental about it.
Yeah.
Or I guess this is a cynical take on it, I suppose. But if it's that he sees also that people like it when he
he's
does talk
nostalgic.
about, oh, me and
Yeah.
John were best friends and
I do
I
think
miss him, and I like, people respond to that because of course we do. You could tell that they were in love with each other. So yeah, I do like that when he is more open about it.
Yeah, I think he does it for all those reasons. I mean, for legacy, because people respond very well to it. I suspect he also wants to reclaim the Lennon-McCartney creative love story because it got a little lost, and I suspect he probably thinks it's his job to make sure that it is found again. And he's given a lot of great interviews over the year. It's not just recently. Actually, I love his early 70s interviews. He was pretty open. There are pockets of time where he's very open. In like 83, 84, 85, he's really open. His interviews are great. I was just going down a rabbit hole of that recently, and it was like he said some really, the 1984 Playboy interview that he did, the SIWJGTTATB interview that he did.
This is that up I want.
Okay,
I want that
okay.
reading
Yeah,
list.
yeah.
I want it.
Yeah, there's the Hunter Davies call that he did in the early 80s where he just was talking to Hunter and Hunter was writing everything down. It wasn't an interview, and then he published it. I mean, there are pockets where he's really open, and then he closes up again. I'll do that episode, Will.
All right, great.
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Okay, so one question for you. Do you ever, this song is so evocative about a breakup. Do you ever wonder what was going on with Paul and Linda when you listen to it, or do you just think of it?
I wonder what put him in this headspace. Even if they just had a fight and he had some distance for a couple days and he extrapolated that into the feeling of a breakup, or if he was remembering something from long before. I always wonder, whenever the Beatles write about heartbreak, these guys famously had more romantic adventures than anybody in history.
Yeah.
Like, who did John write No Reply about? Like, who broke these guys' hearts? I don't know, but I don't know, somebody did.
Well, that's what I said too. I mean, there's a chunk of time where we know nothing about John's. Like, he's very reactive in the early Beatles. Who's he having relationships with?
Yeah.
Yeah, I always wondered that too. And you know what? In this 84 Playboy interview that Paul and Linda, this interview that they give, they talk about their relationship being tempestuous. They seem like they're the calmest, coolest, couple, like just really warm. But I think it wasn't always like that.
Behind the mullet.
Exactly, behind the mullet, exactly.
Yeah.
And
She caught him eating like a piece of bacon.
Yeah, totally.
Late at night.
Exactly, Paul and Linda fights. Yeah, but he said he liked it that way. He was like, it keeps it spicy.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that quote. I love that.
Yeah, great choice. And
thank you.
Onwards. Okay, so let me see. That was our first one. Second one is Katie.
Yes.
Bye.
Please don't wake me up too late. Tomorrow comes and I will not be late. Late today when it becomes tomorrow, I will leave and go away. Goodbye, 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 my love, goodbye. Songs that lingered on my lips excite me now and linger on my mind.
Goodbye.
Oh, I'm leaving now.
Yeah, you've been kicked out. The council has spoken.
That was so polite, though. Yeah, so this one, the more famous version, I suppose, is the Mary Hopkin recording.
Yeah.
So Paul wrote this for her. She was on Apple Records, and then he also plays a bunch of instruments and stuff in her recording of it.
Yep.
But the demo that he recorded was on the bonus tracks in 2019 when the re-release of Abbey Road came out. When we recorded our episode about that, when that came out, we were all at Brett's to listen to it. And I had listened to the album but hadn't gotten through all the bonus stuff before we recorded. That song came on and I started levitating and my eyes turned into lasers and I was like, what is this? Like, I just could not.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Right.
This
we said
melody.
Nothing.
Yeah. That's kind of routine for me, I guess.
Well, we were terrified. You were levitating.
Yeah, I mean, it was my house and there's lasers shining everywhere.
Yeah, I
Yep, you're
said
totally
I'm
right.
sorry about that. No, but I just love the melody of it so much. It's because it's, I mean, I love all sorts of Paul melodies, but
Yeah.
it's such a, I think especially in the demo, because it's just him and an acoustic guitar, it's such like a beautiful folk melody almost.
I mean, it's crazy to think about this time period, like Paul McCartney from 68 to 71, just how many towering home run shots he had for himself, for Badfinger, for Mary. He just seemed to have an infinite number of songs that blow you away. Like, it was crazy.
Like, the demo was recorded really quickly just to kind of like get it out and send it over to her for her to learn the song. And I mean, there's a key change between the two versions, but yeah, I mean, just that he just was like, all right, let's throw this one out. It's not for the Beatles, whatever. And it still is that good. And then this song and another of Mary Hopkins' songs, both times she got to number 2 on the charts because number 1 was the Beatles.
Yeah.
Was let's see, what is it called? The Step Inside Love, was that for Mary Hopkins too?
No, I think that wasn't that Cilla Black? I do like that one.
It had that same quality of him just sort of, you can hear this on Anthology 3, I think, the CDs, but he's just playing it randomly during the White Album session.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just this marvelous.
Yeah, with Los Paranoias or something.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and he's just throwing it out there. I was like, here, this is something I just wrote the other day. It's probably not good for this, but you know, if somebody will record it, it'll be another number 1 hit. Music is easy.
Do you know he doesn't remember writing this song?
No kidding.
Yeah.
Goodbye?
That's infuriating.
Yeah. And I think...
Oh, good. No, I meant goodbye.
Yeah. Oh, you gotta go. That news was too much for Joel.
Goodbye?
Yeah. I think Goodbye is a good example too of, maybe with My Brave Face are like thinking of a specific breakup. I think Paul's also just really good at perspective taking, where the lyrics of this song, for one, I like that in his demo he just left it as like the lover in the song, he uses male pronouns because Mary Hopkins was going to, but I like that he wasn't so worried about it that he changed them to she and her. But anyway, yeah, I mean, like the lyrics have just nothing to do with his life at that time. Like, I think that he's just good at like, what's a story? And what's a situation someone could be in, and then he'll write that.
I don't know. Maybe it does have to do with his life, though, because he, I don't know when exactly he wrote it. Because he doesn't remember it. But it seems to have been like she put it out, spring of
March
69.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he would have written it maybe a month or two before that, in early 69. And he got married in March. And he and Linda have a giant fight the night before they got married. Apparently, Paul went and saw his longtime other girlfriend before that. So I do think he was saying goodbye to his bachelor life. There may have been a few women that he was saying goodbye to. It could be.
Got in his cab and said, all right, 5 addresses we need to.
Exactly. He did. He stopped by. Apparently, there was this girlfriend that he had named Maggie McGivern. And he went to see her. And she said he didn't say anything, but she just knew he was breaking up with her. And apparently, this is a little bit of inside information. That this was in many years from now, but it was cut. That her brother came and like knocked on his door when he found out that Paul was going to get married, and was like, "You have to marry my sister."
Oh man!
And so, yeah, I think there was some entanglements going on at that time, and it seems like when you look at this song, he seems a little bit conflicted, like sad to be leaving that person, but then very excited about the new thing, so could relate there.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's different enough for being boiled down to sounding like it's only about one person. So maybe that's the editing he did. Yeah.
Also, just knowing how he normally worked, he'd generally just write a song like start to finish, or finish it in the same sort of writing session that he started it. So I'm always sort of amazed that he remembers, as many songs as he does. I'm not terribly surprised that he just completely
Oh my
forgets
God! Think
about
of
a
all the
few.
ones that he forgot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mary Hopkins said that he wrote it in 10 minutes, which is crazy. It is. There's just
That was
stuff.
the time between addresses in that cab.
If I wrote that song, if I had written that song, that would have been like my greatest achievement in my life. He did it in 10 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, he wrote this other song. Have you guys ever heard of a song called Panina?
No.
It was written around the same time that he and Linda were in Portugal, and they stumbled into a bar, and he got on the piano, and instead of leaving them a tip, was like, "I'm leaving you this song." And then they made it into a big hit in Portugal.
Oh my gosh.
So he's just writing songs left, right, and center. You know, it's just like you said, Will, it's just coming out of him at this time.
I've tried to do that with my podcasts at restaurants. I record a podcast, I leave it on a little flash drive and say, "This is for you guys." And
yeah, I've actually tipped with a shitty song before too.
Yeah.
I'd prefer the cash.
Yeah.
But one other point is that, to go back to this theme, that yes, he was writing for Mary, and maybe it was imagination, but it's interesting to me. He writes the end that year. He writes the Long and Winding Road, Let It Be, Goodbye. Like, he seems to be saying, whether or not he knew it consciously, I think he was saying goodbye a lot in his music.
On his mind.
Yeah.
Well, he was dead.
That's true.
Famously dead.
Famously dead.
I love his voice in this too. It's just so beautiful. It's like a little daisy.
I love with Beatles songs when you can hear a cover or even just a stripped down version, and it's like, yeah, that's perfect, because their production is so much of their deal, and everything has a million layers and all of that. But when this is like a guy with a guitar, he could conceivably sit down and just play and sing this in any location, and it would be a complete song, and it's so good. Like, so that's gorgeous. So impressive to me.
I think also the way you discovered it, Katie, the way because I think I didn't even know the Mary Hopkins version of this song before we heard it on that Abbey Road thing. It always amazed me when these Giles Martin remixes have come out that there are surprises left, because they've been mined so many times. But there really have been at least something interesting, like some alternate version of something, if not a whole song, that has been like genuinely interesting. And this was certainly one from the Abbey Road. So it really was a hidden gem that you're like, gosh, this was just sitting around. I can't believe it. So
and I was not familiar with the Mary Hopkins version at that point either, and looked it up after that Abbey Road re-release, and then now I love both.
Yeah.
Please don't wake me up too late. Tomorrow comes and I will not be late. Late today when it becomes tomorrow, I will leave to go away.
Her voice is gorgeous. It's funny too that she kind of doesn't love this song. Mary's so funny. She was just like, it was fine, but I'm not sure if it suited me. It wasn't the direction that I wanted to go in. It was
I wasn't happy with being signed by the Beatles and having the Beatles write me a song, and then he's in the video
and
with me. Not enough for
this,
me.
Yeah, this is actually what she said. Although I'm flattered that Paul wrote Goodbye, especially for me, it was, I believe, a step in the wrong direction for me.
You're out of your mind. Paul McCartney could hit me in the face, and that would be the best thing.
It's a hit.
It got to number 2. It was successful.
Exactly. Anyways, you know what? It kind of reminds me of I Will. In terms of the tone and the voice that Paul uses.
And it's such a different vibe between the demo version and the Mary Hopkins version. Just the production choices on hers. There's a couple of differences in the lyrics or performance, but just like way more instrumentation, and it sounds like, I think if I had known that version first, I don't know that it would have jumped out at me the same way of like, oh, what a beautiful melody, even though it's the same melody. I think it's just so stark in this demo. I love it.
Yeah, you're right. It's such a sweet song that it just sounds amazing with Paul, his voice and the guitar. Yeah.
I don't think Paul was capable in this period of like making any bad choice.
Yeah.
With his voice or any instrument. I just think it's like, 1996 Michael Jordan or something. It's like he's just at the absolute top of his game and he knows it. And I can't even imagine him writing a bad, 5 seconds of music from maybe 66 to 69 or 70. And then, after that, maybe it's still 99% perfect.
Oh, I just looked it up. So Panina was recorded by Carlos Mendez. Does anybody else have anything else to say about this one?
We love it.
We love it. It's fabulous. Okay, so next one is Brett's choice. I'm interested to hear what you say about this one, Brett. It is What You're Doing.
Look what you're doing. I'm feeling blue and lonely. Would it be too much to ask of you what you're doing to me? You got me running. And
this is definitely a hidden gem, I think.
Yeah, I think it really counts as one because I remember. I don't remember like specifically when I sort of rediscovered this track, but it's just one of those songs that I think out of maybe the most famous band of all time, that is the most sort of ubiquitously discussed band. I think this song would probably surprise a lot of people who thought they were well-versed Beatles fans. It's just not a song I remember ever hearing on the radio. I remember my parents really talking about or introducing to me. And yet I think like the second it comes over the speakers, to me, it sounds like a hit song. Like it could just in a different universe, this could have been all over the radio and it'd be like, yeah, that's one of the Beatles smash hits. Like it has every sort of element you want. And even like, the drum intro sounds sort of like an iconic intro. And I think I read some sort of conspiracy theories that wasn't actually Ringo playing, but I think it was. But there were...
It was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
It's a really interesting conspiracy theory. It's a long, long walk.
And then there's the like guitar riff that comes out. It's just
so good.
Perfect Birds style 12-string George Harrison, lick that's just immediately sort of iconic sounding. What song do I want to compare it to?
Mr. Tambourine Man.
You
is
can't do almost
turn.
like from the Birds, but it's almost like you can't do that also like a similar guitar kind of passage with this sort of like seventh chord sounding thing. It's just very signature Beatles. And then the song from there is it's musically pretty simple, lyrically I guess pretty simple. I don't have like, it actually is very similar to Drive My Car musically, which even just listening back to it now, I sort of hadn't thought about that before, but it goes
they're in the same
D and G, and then the B minor G thing. It's like it goes.
They're in the same little medley in Beatles Love. They're like mashed up.
That's the first time I think I had ever heard that song was in Love.
Me too. Yeah.
And I was like, where has this one been
Right.
in all my life?
It's one of those ones like in my sort of journey of being a mega fan and trying to like find every single Beatles moment I could listen to, that was one of them that kind of, what I just remember just being like, wow, this is, to me right now, this is like a whole new Beatles song that I totally either hadn't really heard before or forgot about, and it sounds just like one of their early hits.
I love that story because I feel like everybody has that with some Beatles song. And I do think this is one that is within that genre of album Beatles tracks that you discover is one of the least discoverable ones. Like I've Just Seen a Face was that for me. I discovered that kind of late, but I mean,
Oh my
that
God,
song
it's
is
my
so
favorite.
beloved and huge that but still for me, I hadn't heard it until I went through the Help album and I was completely knocked off my chair. And I think What You're Doing is one of those. Really, the second half of Beatles for Sale is a complete just gold mine of hidden gems that didn't get the oxygen that they deserved, either production wise or publicity wise. But I don't want to spoil the party. What You're Doing, even Every Little Thing, they're all just so good.
Oh, I love Every Little Thing. I was
that was another
considering
one.
that too for this, because
'Cause
they're similar
Beat-
songs in a way.
Beatles for Sale is just like gets, I guess, fairly kind of shuffled to the bottom of most Beatles album. I mean, just relative to how many other great albums there are. But then when I revisit it track by track, I'm like, this album's incredible. Like, how could we ever discount
Right.
it? And it's
Mr.
so
Mr.
varied and exciting, and even the covers they pick are amazing.
Like
Sorry,
Mr. Moonlight, right?
which is okay. Don't get me started. That song should be erased from history. There should be a congressional
has in your
bill.
brain.
For me, also just in terms of like geeking out about the Beatles, I've always felt like I've been sort of a sponge, like organically, just for trivia, I guess you could say. But I've always felt a little bit sometimes behind on the trivia. But musically, I'm always like, I just find there's so many interesting things they do musically, and like every, even those early things which are considered simple or people to your ears because they're just so catchy and short and funky, you might think that it's just kind of a nice little love song, but there's they always make sure to put something in there musically that kind of freaks me out. It's different, and it maybe shouldn't even work. Like it almost breaks some musical rule in a way. Could I just play like one note from the solo that I find really
do it. Play as much as you want.
The solo section, like even if you remember the song, the solo section to me is really surprising. It has this weird jangly piano in it, and it almost sounds all of a sudden like jazzy or something. But the chords are just like, like it's just D to G7 or whatever. But then it goes. Like, which sounds very simple, but you hear like
it's nice.
Like that
dissonant
note is, that's what he's hitting, like that, whatever that note is over the G is like a bizarre move to make. Like I feel like a lot of people in the studio would just say, hey, that's a wrong note. That's not part of that chord. It's not in the song sort of anywhere up to that point. So like your ears sort of perk up, at those moments. If you don't like have the vocabulary, which I don't necessarily for all the musical stuff going on.
Thank you for apologizing, because I was thinking, God, you sound like an idiot. I'm just like, the way you're talking about these chords. You could only.
That's exactly what I was thinking too. Doesn't know anything about music.
Just not musical is what I was thinking. This guy doesn't get it.
I think that song too does something that many Beatles songs do that I love. That just all of the different parts are rhythmically different enough that the way that they kind of interlock, or the clockwork of it, is, I think, to me, what keeps it interesting. Where just that, and this kind of came up in that McCartney 3-2-1 thing, of that it's almost like they were writing 4 different songs that could just go on top of each other. I think this is a good example of that, where it's early enough that it's before they were doing anything complicated with the recording particularly. I mean, whatever. But,
the arrangements are always part of the genius. It's like what
yeah,
they're doing and what they're not doing and how it all interlocks, like you said.
and just the musicianship of like that they're not all on the four. It's not all on the
Yes.
four downbeats or just eighth notes or whatever. It's like they're all doing really different, interesting stuff, and they just fit together in a fun way.
And with this song, I feel like the demos are so fun because you can really hear that is a huge thing that they work on very consciously. It's like, what is okay? I have this song I wrote in like 10 minutes. Let's figure out.
Let's distinguish it. Let's put 10%
figure out
on this,
an
10%
arrangement,
on that.
and experiment with the arrangement until we come to like this incredible final result. But then sometimes you discover, like I discovered even listening back for this podcast, like there's a demo out there. I think it says like take 11 or something. And it's fantastic. It almost reminds me of that My Brave Face demo because John and Paul are harmonizing basically every single word of it.
Yeah.
And it's simple and you can tell they're kind of working it out, but you're like, oh, this version I love just as much as the final version, if not more. Like you almost wish they kept that harmony in it.
Yeah, occasionally I feel like that. I think they mostly made the best call, but sometimes that probably just seemed normal to them to do something more interesting.
It may be like My Brave Face, you could almost imagine them going, well, we shouldn't harmonize every single line, or we just did that kind of thing with this other song. Paul, how about you just double track it and do that? But then sometimes you listen back and you're like, you guys just do what works. We love it every time. Just harmonize the entire time, please.
But I mean, I've talked about before how much I love on Beatles albums that there are never two songs that sound the same. And so I think that consciousness of, but we just did this on that other one is, I'm glad that they did that for the results for other things. But I get your point of sometimes there are alternate versions where you're like, but
isn't this the one that George brings up during the Get Back recording sessions that they're like talking about what songs to play?
No,
George
it's
is like
every
little thing.
I
keep doing
the one that doesn't have bass or something. Is that part?
No, he wants to bring it back. Like, remember he says that
George
he was
Harrison,
like, we should do some we should do some oldies, when they're talking about their concert, and he's like, maybe we should have, and then he brings up every little thing, and poor John's like, I've been doing Help really well. John keeps talking about Help, and everybody keeps ignoring him. Like John desperately wants to do a different version of Help.
What I was thinking of is I'll Follow the Sun is one that they were like, have we ever had a song with no bass before?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That to me was so, I love those little moments in the documentary where you just see, like, of course that was only a few years before.
Yeah.
But just to see that they were still connected with those days.
I
and
agree.
they still had those things on their minds, and they weren't,
especially because they weren't touring. It's not like they had stayed in the rotation for them, or they didn't have to. Things to play.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that wasn't in the rotation. It is interesting. I agree with you, Brett. I felt like that too. Like, this is their family of songs that they still love various ones. You know, it's not like they progressed and don't care.
I feel like I've known so many bands that, maybe they'll have an amazing arc throughout their career, but very often there's this sort of, golden period or the glory days or whatever that people talk about, like the early days, and then they go off and they change and people are frustrated because they change.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the things I've always seen in the Beatles arc was they grew so much, but they always gave you like just enough of the connection with the early stuff. Like they never totally abandoned it in a way.
Yeah, there's connective tissue to the previous eras.
Yeah. And I just think like it just works so well.
Yeah, and it's nice to hear they still like it, that they're still talking affectionately about it. The subject of this one kind of makes me laugh because this is about some woman that's driving him crazy. And, I would assume it was Jane Asher. I mean, who knows who it's about, but Paul just has so many songs for the next 2 years about some woman that's not making his life easy.
Right. He has some interesting rhymes in it. Like doing and blue and running and fun in. It's like,
Yeah.
it's that kind of thing where later on their creativity just blossomed it so much and they would innovate every single thing about it. But that was how they were innovating in those early days. Like even just quirky rhymes like that
Yeah.
I
were
love
different.
that musical phrasing too at that part of the "You've got me running"
Me
and
too.
"There's no fun in it."
Yeah.
It's so good.
It is. Actually, you know what? In Goodbye, he does this other little trick too. This, he repeats the same word, like tomorrow comes and I will not be late today
When it
when it
becomes
becomes, he
tomorrow.
does that and they'll linger. So, yeah, he's trying these different little tricks and rhymes that make them really interesting.
Yeah.
I think that rhyme scheme is very Lennon in a fun way. Like, what you're doing, I feel blue in it. That feels very like, please let me listen to your please kind of thing that he was drawn to. I'm not saying he did it. We said in some earlier moment, like people like to talk about the differences between Paul and John, but I'm interested recently in the similarities. Like when
Yeah.
Paul
You said
writes
it
like
before.
I'm quoting me. I think I was right when I said this before. Some really smart person said this.
Someone once said.
Somebody, maybe even me, 2 minutes ago said. But I look for little Lennon-y moments in the McCartney songs and vice versa, and
Yeah.
I think that's one.
Yeah. Okay.
I like to. I'm sorry, we're gonna keep going. That those where he'll put a rhyme, so the rhyme completes the line musically, but then the sentence wraps around or keeps
Yes.
going.
Yes.
I think. I mean, one of my later ones, I'm gonna talk about metric feet for a little bit. So,
Oh, boy.
but I like.
Foreshadowing.
Can't wait. Okay.
Yeah.
I also
Spoiler.
I wanted to say I have a team of fact checkers right here. And they actually just pointed out that I was the one who pointed out that Lennon and McCartney are actually very
Oh, okay,
similar.
all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What?
I need a team.
Where are they? Where are they?
It's my dog.
That's a corgi.
Yeah. I think that follow up on that point. It's like there was a whole era, maybe stemming from breakup narratives that were often false. And some of the really ugly things John might have put out there, like in his, John moments in some of those interviews, that I feel like there was this narrative that Paul wasn't really a wordsmith guy. Like he wasn't a lyrical genius, and he was just the sort of virtuoso on
Music.
musically, and John was the really serious, lyric guy. And I just think, even if it's just these small moments, that's nonsense.
Yeah. No, Paul's an incredible lyricist. I think when he's at the top of his game, he is as good as John. And unfortunately, he's just got so much material and he wasn't vigilant about quality control. And so we can point to some examples of him being a lazy lyricist, and that in some ways undermines the overall view of him. And I think, unfortunately, this view stops people from really looking at the genius of his lyrics. And I think that's one of the reasons that he came out with the book, The Lyrics, is he wants to point to, look at how many incredible lyrics. There was a campaign that his team did. It was on social. They just had lines from various songs, and it made you pay attention to how many clever lines he's got. He's a great lyricist when he wants to be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he loved all those songs from the 20s and 30s where those lyrics were just all fun, and the rhyme scheme was really playful. And John, I think, sometimes just had like his own sort of artist wordplay and absurdist, whereas I think you could definitely hear Paul in Cole Porter.
You're right.
Yeah, those kinds.
Sometimes Paul was so it came so easily to him in some ways, or he was so comfortable with like a really fast process and it would just flow out of him. And in some ways, I feel like that's almost the most John part about him, is that he actually wasn't as perfectionist and fussy. Like he was okay just letting quirky moments like go to tape,
Yeah.
and if the lyric didn't totally make sense, but it sounded fun and it was fun to sing, and then those are the moments, you know, you listen back and you're like, oh, that's actually really clever. No one
Yeah.
else would have done that.
You know, maybe trusted his
Yeah.
creative process. Like, let's see, it might be good. All right, onwards. Oh, great, Joel. This is one that I thought you were kidding,
Me.
but
Oh, we're
but
skipping.
I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this one.
Well, so this is the isolated drum track from "Oh Darling," and now I've always had a lot of affection for the song, and anyway, but I guess when I heard the isolated drum track, I was sort of mesmerized by it, or not sort of, I was mesmerized by it. Now, if you're yeah, okay, well, there goes Will, lost Will.
I'm here.
Ringo gets, if you are, you know, low level obsessed with this band, and you Ringo does get a lot of praise because of certainly in the last 10 or 15 years, I think, on with maybe the advent of YouTube, where there's just oodles of people celebrating what he does, whereas before that maybe he might have been overlooked as a drummer from a fan perspective because of his personality is just so was sort of leading the charge as far as what was charming about Ringo.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think I'm not a drummer, so I can't really attest to that, but it's hard to find like concrete examples of like where you can go, this is what makes Ringo so great. So sometimes you have to take all the instruments out and listen to just what he's doing. And I'm not sure if this is a good example of his Ringo-ness. It's just that he's playing to the song, I guess, is what I think was so great about this. He's not like, there are tons of isolated drum tracks from a lot of different bands and from a lot of like heralded drummers. So in this one, it's not the most flashy thing, but to me, I hear a symphony of all sorts of different sounds emanating from maybe at this point, the biggest drum set he had ever had, which was, Brett, you might help me on this one, but I think he had a bass drum. At this point, he had two drums. Well,
yeah.
But no, I mean, just the amount of drums. He finally advanced to a second tom, and I think he removed that after this album back to one.
Interesting.
So he's always been a very simple drummer. But what I love about this, in addition to just all the fills that he's playing, which sound like, even with 3 drums that he's playing, it sounds like he's playing 16 different drums. And also you hear, this is a good one for headphones or earbuds, where you hear the room reverb every time he hits that snare. And that gives me tingles for some reason. I don't know why. It just is so, it's a beautiful example of this beautiful man playing like almost like a soldier, in a way of just like, I'm just here to do my job, which in this incredible Paul song, and play the drums and support it. And it's also just extremely an exciting track to me.
Are we saying that it's like creative as opposed to lockstep? Like, you could imagine a simple drum beat that's just basically trying to be an effective click track for Paul, but he instead is feeling each moment.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of saying that he's like, he's proving that he is a drum track, a click track.
Yeah.
But he's also when he's doing these fills with only 3 drums, I can't track them. I almost can't. You almost can't write. Each one seems different from the previous one, and he seems to be as you know, this is not a shock, but he's just making it up as he goes. And I think he might have said, like, at some point, that I don't really try to remember much of my like how I record, and then I just have to listen to it again if I need to learn it again. But
yeah, this is, I mean, it is, I was similarly obsessed with this isolated drum track, because to me, yeah, you've heard good things about Ringo. You've certainly heard the criticisms, and one thing you would hear is, oh, he couldn't keep time, or he could barely do this or that, or wasn't flashy, or
you talked to Quincy Jones. It sounds like you were
know,
hanging out with Quincy Jones.
yeah, with Quincy Jones. He had some crazy stuff to say about Marvin Gaye, by the way. But but yeah, to me, this is like, and for me as sort of like a musician, I've worked with drummers, and like I've worshipped, the virtuoso drummers and all of that. Like, there is a difference between just a good drummer and a great drummer and like a studio drummer. And this, it sounds like a studio drummer. Like, there's a term like in the pocket for drums, where it's something almost beyond just being in time. It's like there is a serious, like, deep groove to it. And the fills are really, like, advanced. They're very sophisticated. Like, that is a hard thing to, like, I don't know if I've met anyone who would play drums that way. There's a lot to go over with this track.
So are you saying that this is a great example of how technically good Ringo is, or how he plays to the song, or both?
I would say both. I mean, it's just you don't think of this song as something that would even need, a standout drum track.
I think you hit it. Yeah, I think, Diana, that this I never paid attention to the drums in the song before I listened to the isolated track. Yeah,
thought you were joking. Yeah,
right.
But this, I think, proves that the drums make a huge difference in it. Huge. And the same goes for other Beatles tracks. Like, he has a seriously, like, deep sense of rhythm, and that's very signature to Ringo, and it's all over the fills. The fills are so creative and inventive in this, and they're different. They're different.
Yeah.
There's a ton of, like, ghost notes, and just a lot going on.
It shows that he also had good taste, the way that the other Beatles did, so that he that he's actively contributing to songwriting in his way, rather than, you know what I mean, just showing up and putting a beat under something.
100%. I think just knowing how Paul was, particularly in for better, for, well, I don't want to get into that, but Paul could dictate a lot of what happened in the songs to the others. So he was not shy about suggesting. This is one song where I would say I could believe that Paul never told him to do anything except whatever happened.
Really?
Yeah. I particularly because of these fills, I just don't think you can tell someone to do that.
No.
Okay.
I think it's just as like one of your options, Diana, about is he playing to the is he just playing to the song so well? And I think that is where these are just great examples of that.
What I like about this choice, Joel, when you said it, is you can learn a lot from people's kind of showy centerpiece moments, like Ringo's drumming on Rain, maybe, or on She Said, She Said. These times that have been rightfully cited as these really cool drum tracks. But, like, what's somebody like just when they're doing their job? Like, what's the yeoman's work, the workman-like task? In the Rick Rubin documentary, like Katie was saying, it sounded like they were just four original songs all put on top of each other, that they were just good at making everybody was good at making their contribution interesting on its own, in a way that added to the whole. This is an example of Ringo's part of that. It's as interesting as hearing, like, Paul's bass part on And Your Bird Can Sing, where, like, George's little lead fills on "I've Got a Feeling" or something. Like they're not the centerpiece of the songs, but they're cool and they're good in a way that's part of the weird alchemy that makes the Beatles songs explode into the atmosphere.
All of those little things, if they were done in a sort of generic way, might really bring the song down. You know, it might not be a song because "Oh Darling," well, I mean, Paul's vocal is enough to freak out about, but it is essentially he's just doing kind of like an oldies throwback song,
doo-wop kind of thing.
And if they did it in a sort of hacky way, I don't know, it just might kind of be dull, especially when it came out, you know. But there's
doing this podcast with you guys has definitely made me appreciate, you know, I used to attribute more to just pure songwriting, like the sheet music that John and Paul would bring in, and of course that's often tremendous and really good. But I've come to appreciate more that it's the four of them in the studio and what they do with the songs bring it to life beyond what's on the page. Not all the time. Something like Yesterday, I do believe Yesterday as sheet music is a rocket ship. But like "Oh Darling," that could just be a little Fats Domino ripoff or something like that. But you add in Paul's incredible vocal, some cool, great, all of Abbey Road. Really, it's the production and the performance elevates so many of those. Actually, I as soon as I say that, I'm like, no, Here Comes the Sun. Something, never mind. But
yeah, I mean, "Oh Darling" too. Like if you hear all the sort of rehearsal or demo versions where Paul is sort of singing it in a easy, convenient way, where it's just sort of him in falsetto and in a lighter way, I don't even know if I love it that much. But it's only because of that like serious effort they put into the actual recording. You know, him smoking
it's like "I Want
tons
You"
of cigarettes and screaming his voice out, and it's like it's that approach that just makes it incredible.
Well, I feel like that about it. I love "I Want You." She's so heavy, so much.
Oh yeah.
But that's one where you hear John playing it, and I don't love it that much on its own before it's all production. But the production is genius, you know.
I was going to say sorry, Katie, go for it.
Sorry, just beyond the production is absolutely part of it and adding those layers and everything. But I think that's what I like. It is how much they're just continuing to write the song. You know, so someone comes in with, "Hey, here's what I wrote," but it's like none of that's fixed. They're gonna all constantly add stuff until they all think it's done.
I think something you said maybe in the Facebook group, Diana, although at this point's been echoed well by other people, but like a lot of what's missing in Beatles solo songs is what would it have been like if the other guys had a crack at it? Like, as good as so many Beatles solo songs are, what happens to Band on the Run if it's John playing rhythm guitar on that? You know, or maybe even better examples would be like album tracks. Like what happens to Mrs. Vanderbilt if it's like George putting some licks in there or something?
Yeah, well, that was a conversation that we just had on the One Sweet Dream Facebook group, and somebody asked how many of Paul's solo tracks are Beatles worthy, and that's kind of an interesting idea because you sort of think, well, they weren't as good afterwards. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily.
That's definitely something people say all the time.
Yeah, that's something that people say. It's not something I believe, but it was only in the past 5 years that I've really come to embrace that a lot of these songs are Beatles quality. They just don't have the Beatles.
Which if the Beatles did "My Brave Face," it would be amazing. And that all of a sudden, retroactively, that song's, of course, it's Beatles worthy, you know. And if you take "Oh Darling" and it doesn't have Ringo's drum part, George Martin's production, maybe that's not Beatles worthy anymore. Maybe.
I was going to say that the speaking of Abbey Road and Isolated and Something, like the isolated bass line from Something is so it's so much, and then if you had that missing from the final song, it would sound completely different. And I wonder if that's the same, maybe not as much, but with the drum track with "Oh Darling."
Interesting. Yeah.
But to me, it's both the creativity and all of that, and also I just kind of like it for Ringo's legacy. It's like it proves that he is a studio level, like he can execute like in the studio at like an insane level, like that kind of drumming you hear there you could throw that in the most exacting band you can think of from that period.
Great. I love it. I love it. This is a great hidden instrumentation, hidden excellent part of a song.
Yeah.
And Joel,
Hidden
you were
component.
joking, right?
And
Yeah,
it was a
hidden-
joke,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Joel? You don't even like it.
Okay, so we are going to move to Will's choice here, which was not exactly hidden, but Will, why did you choose?
Why? What's not hidden about this? This is a little known track called "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand when I say that something. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. And when I touch you, I feel happy inside. It's such a feeling that my love I can't hide, I can't hide, I can't hide. Yeah,
You Americans might remember it from the little indie show, The Ed Sullivan Show. Okay, yeah. So even when I picked it, I know it's an insane thing to slot this into a show called
No,
Hidden
it's
Gems.
perfect. No, it's
Yeah.
perfect.
But
I thought you were joking.
the reason I wanted to talk about it was I do think that it doesn't get its due
Yes.
in modern Beatles fandom.
See, that's why it's right.
Yeah, so the White Album and Abbey Road are very modern sounding albums still.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
one of the many amazing things about them. And you can put Abbey Road on and play it, and it doesn't stand out like an old song. I Want to
Yeah.
Hold Your Hand definitely sounds like an old rock and roll song, but I think because of that, it gets ignored.
Yeah.
Just the underlying architecture of it, the energy of it, the John's lead vocal is incredible. I think it gets underappreciated, and I think it's unique. I think of this of all of the early Beatles hits. It's unique they wrote songs completely at this time. They were not
Mhm,
like
mhm.
fractured pieces that got improved in the studio. They built I Want to Hold Your Hand to like elevate them. They built it
Yeah.
to become famous on. Same with She Loves You. I almost picked She Loves You.
Mhm.
And all the early singles.
Which do you prefer?
I think
that's
She
a
Loves You is
statement.
more fun, but I think I Want to Hold Your Hand is more interesting as a piece of songwriting.
Mm.
I think She Loves You is, look, they're both, you're picking between a diamond and a ruby, in my opinion, but like She Loves You is almost so much of a snowball rolling forward,
It's
relentless thing that
Joy.
there's
Yeah.
a little bit
Yeah.
of restraint in I Want to Hold Your Hand that I think is cool. It's a little bit more mid-tempo. I don't know. They're both amazing. But
I think She Loves You just has a newer, fresher narrative in it than I Want to Hold Your Hand, and that might be the difference, or one big difference.
When I listen to I Want to Hold Your Hand, I try to hear it as a new pop song from a group I don't know.
Yeah.
This obviously is the track that broke them out in America, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
of course, it was also a huge hit in England. And hit songs are special in their own way. The way they break through the noise of what's on the radio, there's something that they are speaking to the moment. You can
Mhm.
say this about anything that has dominated. You can say this about Bad Guy by Billie Eilish, Hey Ya by Outkast, Hit Me Baby One More Time by Britney Spears. I know that Beatles fans might not necessarily agree that I Want to Hold Your Hand goes in the bucket with these songs, but they all are things that broke out and just became earworms. This is the Beatles earworm. Like, that didn't happen to Across the Universe, or Sexy Sadie or something. Cooler songs. This
Mhm.
one penetrated out and took over, and it fascinates me. That opening, like dun 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 dun
Great
dun dun
intro.
dun dun.
Great intro.
It's
I
so
think-
fun, and it's hard charging, and it's young guys full of energy and ambition, and they're
Yeah.
sick of being poor, and
I
they
think
want
the
to be
hand
rock
claps,
stars.
the hand claps in that song make it so it's so easy to visualize in a movie, like That Thing You Do style
Yeah.
movie,
Yeah.
of like
Right.
someone that comes on and they're like tapping their finger on the counter, not even aware of how much they're digging this song, or you know what I mean? Something.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
hand
Something
claps are so
innocent-
catchy.
And it makes it happy, and there's something about
Yes,
that
exactly.
just
It's
make
so
it joyous, you know.
they are, we've talked about how the Get Back documentary revealed how much love they still had, despite the sort of talking point of that era being that they're sad. But this is real unbridled joy, just like
Yeah,
nobody would even think to characterize it as anything but like people on the way up.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
it's the Beatles loving being in the Beatles. The competition has not yet started in terms of who gets what credit. It's both John and Paul singing the whole time. It's using every lesson they've learned in their short little recording career. The minor turn that they used in
yeah.
From Me to You, the same chord progression that they would use. I can't even remember. Brett, you might be able to speak better to it, but like, even just thrown in a little B7 that they probably learned from like in Hamburg from whatever the guy's name was that they did My Bonnie with. I think
Sheridan, was
yeah,
it?
Sheridan. I think Sheridan was always. I think I read in something that Sheridan said, "Use more sevenths, boys. It makes it more bluesy or something." But there's some.
Shut up, Tony.
This song is a peak in a way that I get so happy every time I hear it. I never get tired of it. It's Al Green, when he started recording, this was the first song he recorded and released it as a single because his manager was like, "We need a hit. This song's a hit."
I think it's
And
interesting to think about this song if it had different lyrics, because I think the reason sometimes it's just sort of waved away or
because
almost
it's so silly.
dismissed is just because of the corniness of the hook. I want to hold your hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, the sort of macho way of like listening to music or something.
It's
You're like,
corny, yeah.
I'm not going to be caught, singing that lyric or
Of course. I
But
hear
like
that.
just musically, purely musically, if you just had the exact same energy and delivery and everything with different lyrics, I think it's an interesting thought experiment. I think we would think very differently about
I
that
want to
song.
play in the
because
sand.
It's actually yeah.
Yeah. You fixed it, Joel. You fixed it.
That's much less innocent than
Exactly.
It wouldn't sound
Right.
so dated as I Want to Hold Your Hand. Yeah.
But
Well, I think
it's a cool sounding song. Like it's heavy
Yes.
actually. Like that intro
The
you pointed
intro
it
was-
out. The
Yeah.
intro is like big.
It's almost dangerous.
Also,
Yeah.
they don't do a lot of fast up-tempo songs in the whole back half of their career. They basically discover marijuana and like chill out forever. Okay, wait, Helter Skelter notwithstanding, but like
Mhm.
the song that created heavy metal notwithstanding, but
That was Paul's coke period.
right.
Right.
I can
I
just
also love
picture
John's
Paul's.
vocal. I think John's vocal. Oh, go ahead, Katie.
Oh,
You can
just
picture
Paul's like probably this is just because they played it on the Ed Sullivan Show, but just I can picture Paul's little floppy hair and when he's doing those falsetto.
Yeah.
Is this one of the few? Are they? This might be an illusion, but are they not harmonizing for that? Are they just basically saying the same line? Oh yeah, I tell you something.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a lead from John. I thought it was them all the way through. But
It might be them all the way through, but I just picture John as the lead. I don't know why. John's
so
voice gives it
exciting.
a heft to me. Like,
Yes.
I think John could sing a otherwise childlike sounding song and give it like an appetite.
Edgy.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
when
he's a little edgier.
Paul, they're singing in unison, but when Paul breaks out to that
Yeah.
super high
so
harmony,
good.
that
See,
just
that's what Paul does.
takes it
Paul
to a
gives
whole
the
different
energy.
thing.
I think you're right that John gives it like an edginess, but I think that Paul's harmonies always give it that jolt of
Yes,
energy.
I think that's what
you know?
gives you
the bridge
that
with Paul's high
thrill.
harmony is so insanely beautiful.
Yeah.
Um,
And what a downshift! Like that they were brave enough to do that.
Yeah, and it kind of
sort
like the drums, it gets a little less busy and sonically it gets
Yeah.
just slightly quiet before it explodes again. And I think the corniness, Brett, you're absolutely right. It'd be interesting to think about if less, I don't know, however you put it, corny lyrics. But
I want to borrow $1,000.
thank you, Joey. Once again,
Yeah.
another genius alt from the doctor.
Dr. Alt.
I think it just
I have
sounds
a swollen
dated.
gland.
Yeah, there you go. Because of like
What if that hit? Wouldn't that be? Remember, where were you on Ed Sullivan when you heard I got a swollen
I
gland?
have a swollen gland. Imagine
I
that
feel
high
like-
harmony on that.
Yeah. It's not, I think it's just dated because of how romantic, like it's like a song being like, I'd like to take you on a date with a chaperone.
Yes,
Like,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
right,
that's
right.
basically it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When they definitely were not like that at that time, but they
That
knew
was a
it
severed
so.
hand that they were talking about. Yeah.
But I do think that a lot of pop songs need something that's a little corny or uncool or trying too hard, ironically, to make it sound less precious and more immediate and like, look, this isn't for the ages. This is for you now and to enjoy. I think like I read like for Baby Love in Motown, like they had that whole song written and then Berry Gordy wanted like the little babies thrown in. He wanted something to make it sound
Ooh,
more
baby, baby.
disposable, ironically, would make it
Mm.
longer lasting, strangely. And I think the hand claps and I Want to Hold Your Hand both cheapen it, but also make it fun
Yeah.
and light
I
and
think it makes it
unpretentious.
so immediately accessible too.
Yeah.
Of like the
Mhm.
first time you hear the song, you could listen to 2 measures and then you could clap along with the hand claps.
I love this song, and I just think it doesn't get its due. To me, it's top 5 Beatles songs. Not just because it's historically important. I mean, I want someone to do it now. I want
Yeah.
somebody to cover it now and make it work again. I believe that it's in the bones of this song to
Post
always work.
Malone, where
Post
are
Malone,
you?
do I want to? I'll get it. I'll get it.
Perfect for
Sweet.
appealing to teens too.
Yeah.
Both for the time period, but I also feel like now it sounds like a song that could be like a breakout hit of a teen Disney person or something.
Yeah, but that to me makes it interesting. Like that, it's almost every future pop entity is in this song somewhere. And from obvious boy bands like NSYNC, One Direction, stuff like that. But just I don't know, I love it.
But
And
see, I think it's like more, again, the music of it is more like rock and roll than that almost gives it credit to in some ways. Like,
I love this argument. I love this story
yeah,
we're telling.
it's like you could, yeah, it's just the lyrics are what makes it, and it's impossible to separate it.
Dylan has an interview that this was the first Beatles song he heard. He was in the car, and that he thought that they were saying I get high, not
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't hide. He thought they were saying I get high. He's like, wow, how are they getting away with
He was like,
talking
yeah.
about pot? But I think I can't hide is like just slightly more vulnerable and interesting.
Yeah.
Not in a way that
Yeah.
I don't think they were calculating that, but just John and Paul's instincts were just always slightly a little bit deeper than necessary for the job in a way that made them interesting. I also love that it's a John and Paul song. This is not writing wise. It's them eyeball to eyeball in Jane Asher's house writing a song together.
Yeah, this is a
as a
true
Beatles fan, I can feel it. It's John and Paul united
Yes.
with full power.
It also it strikes me as like one of those songs that is it's like it's the Beatles defined in every way. Like there's not, you don't hear it in terms of its influences and stuff. Like they don't
Yeah,
sound
it's true.
they don't sound like the band that's kind of doing Buddy Holly
It's
mixed
true.
with a little Roy Orbison and
Exactly.
This is the
sound like
Beatles. Yes.
pure. It's just the sound that only
It's
the
new.
Beatles can make. It doesn't even sound like other British bands.
It's worth going, doing that mind experiment of like just trying to put yourself in a place where you've never heard something like this before, and all of a sudden it just pops out of the radio, and you're like, this band's going to change everything.
Oh my God!
Not to mention how good it is musically. The harmonies they're just every little trick that they've honed is just coming out like it's no big deal.
Yeah,
harmonies and a great little lead.
Is this the most Beatles song ever?
You can make a definitely
you
great
can make
argument.
a definite argument for that one, yeah.
And the one thing that the early Beatles songs have on the later ones is it's all of them. It's as beautiful as Hey Jude is. That's a Paul song. That's
Yeah.
this is Paul and John, and it's all of them. George's lead, Ringo's drums. Woo, baby, it's good.
We want to be your band.
We want to be your band.
So not a hidden gem, but I do think maybe the beauty of it has been kind of overshadowed, ironically, by later, more modern sounding Beatles tracks.
And like you were saying, Diana, even She Loves You, it sort of overshadows it.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. But I'm glad we spent the time on this one. Now all of a sudden we've discovered this is the most Beatles song ever. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And it is the two of them. So they wrote it together in Jane's basement.
There's a lot of fond memories, like John Lennon in that Rolling Stone interview when he ripped apart everything. He still wouldn't rip this song apart. He's like, I love that. I want to do that song again.
Yeah.
He
He
talks
also
about
said,
when Paul put the B7 hold at the end, they looked up at each other like, oh, that's it. That's how we're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
come around to the ending again.
Yeah, yeah. And then later, when he was talking to Playboy in 1980, he said, we wrote a lot of stuff together, one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball, like in I Want to Hold Your Hand. So he tells that same story here.
That was them staring at their eyeballs and saying, can we just hold hands for a little bit? Like, tired of the
because I
eyeball
get high.
thing. Yeah.
I get high.
But then, go ahead.
That must be where I'm remembering it from, Diana, that quote. I love that quote in that interview.
Yeah, and that's when he admits that he was like, "Oh yeah, I was totally lying in Rolling Stone. We did write a lot together." Which is
Oh,
so
really?
sad
Yeah.
because he totally admits he was complete. He said, "I felt upset." I forget the exact quote, but he was like, "I felt upset, and I just felt that way. It wasn't true." And it's so sad that he admitted that it wasn't true at all, but that's still believed.
Yeah.
Because Paul's really pushed this story of a lot of songs were written, if not together, they were large contributors to each other's songs.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, and I found this quote from Paul from 2004, and it says here, the thing about me and John is that we were different, but we weren't that different. I think Linda put her finger on it when she said me and John were like mirror images of each other.
Must have heard when Will said that before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say, even down to how we started writing
Somebody
together.
smart said it.
Then again, my fact checkers pointing out that I said it.
Oh yeah, sorry.
I haven't seen these fact checkers.
Anyways, he ties it exactly to facing each other eyeball to eyeball, exactly like a mirror. That's how songs like I Want to Hold Your Hand were written.
I love it.
So there you go. Full circle.
Love it.
Love it.
That's my hidden gem. One of the most famous songs in the history of pop music.
And that concludes part 1 of my discussion with the crew from Screw It, We're Just Going to Talk About the Beatles podcast. Part 2 will be out in 2 days on Thursday, January 23rd, so please stay tuned for that episode. I will now leave you with a little teaser of where we pick up on Thursday. Until then, take care. Bye for now.
SW